Hello, it's your me. I'm kind of running out of ideas of saying meme mom. And it's meme mom, by the way. It's not meme mom, like whatever the hell that means. Either way, hello and thanks for clicking this video and tuning in. Today I wanted to share with you a couple of things. Wait, sorry, I need to plug the battery in. Today I wanted to share with you a couple of things I wish I knew about buying vintage stuff. I am not like a vintage clothes collector by any means. Like, I only own a couple of pieces, mostly crap because they were cheap. So like, I'm not an expert, and I tend to say it a lot in videos where I'm trying to share my knowledge with you, but it's true. Like, I don't know. Crap. Why am I even making this video then? I don't know. I just, that's just my idea. Okay, just deal with it. My leg is itchy. What is your problem? To be honest, my first ever vintage piece that I bought myself, and it's older than, let's say, 1960s, was a 1940s blazer. And I got it almost exactly a year ago, so I've only been searching for and buying vintage stuff for a little more than a year now. Okay, maybe 2 years, but like the last year was the most intense when it comes to like vintage buying, because that's when I started to earn money, so I was like, well, I might as well spend it. As a total noob that I was, I had absolutely no clue how you even start. I started following a couple of vintage shops on Instagram, and that's kind of a good way to look at vintage pieces and kind of get an idea of how much should they cost and like what condition they usually are and like what sizes are the most popular, so that you kind of get a good idea of what to look for and which pieces are overpriced, because that's one of the things I want to talk about today, is that some vintage shops and some sellers tend to overprice their clothing. Sometimes it's justified. Like, if you see a very expensive dress, you should ask yourself a couple of questions. Like, for example, is it designer? Like, if it has the designer label, it's kind of justified because that's a rare piece that used to be expensive back in the day. Is it in an excellent condition? Like, has it never been worn before? Because sometimes you get dead stock pieces that's kind of like, wow. And if not, is the design unique? Is it fully embroidered? Is it, you know, something that is not easy to find? Is it really rare? Does it look really modern even though it's, let's say, 1940s or 1930s? Is there something really so special and unique about it that the price is justified? An example of unjustified high price for me would be, let's say, $300 for a regular dress, let's say like a day dress that's simple color, no embroidery on it, that has some condition issues, let's say a couple of holes or like faded. That for me is a prime example of an overpriced piece of clothing. I'm not gonna say what the usual price should be for clothing like that because it really varies from item to item, from shop to shop. I'm not gonna say like the exact amount of money you should pay for a dress or you shouldn't pay for a dress, but just be careful and make sure you have kind of an idea of what it should be priced like. Is that even a sentence? I don't think so. So what I'm saying is, at the beginning I had no clue, so everything seemed expensive to me, and then I kind of started to realize what prices are reasonable and which prices are definitely too much for me. And also, you can't go into buying vintage and wanting to get the best pieces, because you're gonna have to start with the wounded birds, with the pieces that need a little bit help to get them back to their former glory. You're gonna need to find pieces that are not so unique, like stuff that, you know, there are hundreds of similar dresses out there, and you're gonna have to slowly climb up from there. And that's another thing that I discovered recently, actually, is that things that I bought a year ago are not that valuable to me anymore. Not because I wore them a lot, but because they don't seem that unique anymore, you know what I mean? Like, I bought the cheapest stuff because that's what I could afford, and now when I think of it, like, it doesn't even fit me that way. I just bought it because it was cheap, and like the design itself or like the color, it's not anything unusual. So like, after a couple of years or like after a couple of months even sometimes, you might find yourself not being that impressed by your former decisions. that applies to life actually as well. So it's a normal thing for a vintage clothing collector, or like whatever you want to call it, to gradually get rid of the things that you don't need anymore. You just don't really need them. And it's not a bad thing because you don't need to hoard all of them. It's not a bad thing to just let it go and pass it along to someone else. It's completely normal to get rid of some of the pieces from your wardrobe to get new pieces and, you know, gradually improving your wardrobe. So I'm not exactly sure why I started with prices, because that's not the most important thing about vintage clothing, but it might, for some people, it might be this wall that they think is impossible to cross. And to be honest, I'd rather save up money for a couple of months and get something I really want and I know is really good quality than instead buy something else that's a little bit cheaper. Because last year in winter I really wanted a vintage coat, but I couldn't really afford it, so I kept buying second-hand or modern coats, and I ended up having like 5 different coats and none of them was the one I wanted. And then I got angry and I just spent a couple of months saving up for a winter coat that I bought in spring because I knew I would wear it the next year. So like this year I only have one coat that's my dream coat and I saved up for it a couple of months and it's perfect condition, it looks brand new. I know it's good condition, I know it's really well tailored, and I'd much rather wear something like this, even though I have to save up money for it, than wear substitute stuff that I really don't enjoy that much. So if you can, try saving up money for like one piece, then after a year you're gonna get another dream piece that you have that you really want, and in the end you're gonna end up with at least a set of basic clothing that can just improve your vintage style. Stop it. So that's about the prices. Where to look for vintage clothing? A couple of years ago I had no clue it was even possible to buy stuff like that. Like, I knew antique clothing existed, I knew it was in the museums, I knew some people had it in their houses because they inherited it from their grandmas or something, but I had no clue that you can not only buy it but also wear it. So obviously I had no idea, like when I found out, I had no idea where people get those things from. And I'm not gonna tell you the shops that I buy it because, you know, I don't want you guys to buy all my stuff, okay? But there is so much of them. There is just an abundance of clothing online. You just need to look for it. Instagram is a good place to start if you start searching after the tags. It's really easy to find gorgeous pieces, even if they're sold out. You can still follow the shop, or like even, you know, sometimes I do awful things, but sometimes I just save pictures of the clothing that has been sold and I tend to be inspired by it, making my own pieces, which I don't think is a bad thing because I'm not copying the design or anything, and it's kind of like looking at a fashion plate from a Victorian era, oh my god, trying to make a similar dress nowadays. I don't think that's, you know, copyright infringement or anything. Is it? Either way, it's a good place to start, and even if you don't intend buying vintage clothing anytime soon, you can still look at the pieces, get used to the prices, get used to the design. Sometimes you'll start noticing that some designs are in like high demand for some reason and some of them are not. You can also try like non-mainstream places to get vintage clothing. And I mean, like, if you're abroad, let's say in Italy, if you're in a small town and there is this one antique shop that looks kind of inviting, just go there, because you never know, like they might have a rack full of clothing that they don't even know is vintage. Like, I recently went to Yorkshire with my friend and we went to this vintage shop that I think we've been there before, and it wasn't really that impressive. Like they mostly had like 1980s stuff, but we missed the fact that they had some more pieces upstairs, so we went there this year and it turned out they had Edwardian clothing kind of mixed with, you know, theatrical 1980s costumes somewhere out there. It was really cheap because I don't think they knew how much money they could get for it. So it's really worth looking to random places because sometimes that's where you can get the cheap stuff. I'm not saying the best stuff because it's often, you know, in not the best condition it could be, but with some work it could get to a really nice state and you can save a lot of money buying random pieces. I know some of my friends are really good at finding amazing vintage pieces secondhand, and I mean vintage as in 1930s, 1940s, like not 19... to be honest, I'm too lazy to do that, and I've tried doing that in my city with no luck really. I think I found a 1960s coat once, and that was pretty much the only piece I got, but I know people that have found 19th century pieces of clothing in secondhand shop. It's not impossible. Like I can tell you're gonna comment like, oh, I wish I could find vintage pieces in my country, but unfortunately, shut up. Like, I'm pretty sure you have a lot of secondhand shops that import clothing from other countries, so you can't really excuse yourself by saying, oh, my country, you know, was poor and we don't have stuff like that. No, it's not true. Just go there and just move your ass. And also, not only you have to look in weird places, but it's good if you get to know people that are into collecting antique things or like antique, even, I don't know, furniture stuff. Basically, if you meet anyone that's into old stuff and does it for a living, it's good to let them know that you're looking for vintage pieces, because even though they didn't find them attractive before, now they have a person they could sell those things to. Automatically, when they're looking for their, you know, antique pieces, they would start looking for clothing. And that happened to me actually, because some vintage sellers, like some vintage clothing sellers, mostly focus, especially in Poland, they mostly focus on like post-1960s period, like 1960s to 1990s. But once they found out I'm looking for older pieces, they actually started looking for them as well, and they would contact me and say, you know, I've got this 1940s dress, and I think that's really cool, because pieces that they thought wouldn't sell before, you know, they found at least one person that would buy them. If you ever meet a person that's into selling stuff like that, let them know you're looking, and maybe they will source something for you. You never know, and they're usually, you know, the prices are usually really good because you're the only person they know that would buy this stuff. So a sad thing is that the condition of the clothing might not always be the best. Despite what the sellers write online especially, the clothing might need a lot of work. And that's something you need to remember, that it's not like you get a vintage piece in post, you open it and you can just go and wear it. Usually you need to at least clean it, and if the seller is good, they've already done it for you, but you never know, to be honest. And then you might need to look for any kinds of strains or holes that might need repairing, because if you don't do it as soon as possible, it would get much worse. A good example is this jacket. It has a couple of holes that I've tried fixing, but the worst thing is that the lining inside my sleeve has ripped off completely, and I've only noticed it today when I was putting my hand inside, and it just didn't want to go because I put it inside, you know, between the lining and the actual fabric. So I could have noticed that the thread that joined the lining together was not in the best condition, and it started tearing a bit. I could have fixed it before, but I was too lazy. So now I have a ripped off sleeve. That's not ideal. And you want to make sure that before you take your vintage clothing out for a spin, you spend at least a couple of minutes to carefully search for any kind of damage, and then probably a couple of hours fixing it. That's something worth learning. Like, if you don't know how to sew, it might be useful to at least learn the basic stitches so you can fix your clothing before you wear it, because if you don't do it, it might get much worse.
Now that's a lot of damage!
I've actually read it in a tiny, like, reprint of a World War II book on mending your clothes. That's what they said, and I think it kind of makes sense, because if you have a hole and then you wash your clothing, the hole might get a bit bigger, and that's not ideal. So that's one thing. Another thing is, never trust the seller, and that's kind of sad. I mean, if you're sure someone is doing a great job on fixing the things, the tiny things, before they give it to you, and if you know someone is always being honest, you can kind of skip that step, but make sure you look carefully at the pictures before you buy the clothing, because I've had cases of clothes being described as mint condition when I got them and it turned out they're actually like falling apart. You know, what means mint condition for someone might actually, you know, considering the age of clothing, they might think mint condition is, it's basically still in one piece. But for you, mint condition should mean there is nothing in there that could mean it's unwearable. Pay attention to silk, especially if silk is pre-World War One. I bought a 1910s, a teens dress recently and it was described as in, I think it said good condition, and then it turned out it's basically like you can't really touch it because it will just fall apart. You know, I wish the seller just mentioned that it's made of silk taffeta and it's basically cracking really easily, and it, you know, it already had a couple of cracks when it came to my place, and that wasn't mentioned in the description at all, so it would be nice if they mentioned that. And also, what's really sad, and I think it's the most tragic part of buying vintage clothing, is that things get lost in post a lot. Luckily it only happened to me twice. Once when I was buying 1980s sandals, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, I can live without them, it's not, like, no big deal, just like bless whoever got them. But I still paid for them and they never got to me, and I spoke to the seller and they said, oh, that's funny because we got a notification saying it was delivered to the right address, and I was like, well, that's good to know, but I never got them. But then there was this vintage piece that my sister bought for me, and I was supposed to get it for my birthday, and I still hadn't received this package, and it's, you know, it was supposed to be for my birthday a year ago, so I'm kind of losing, you know, faith in getting it anytime soon. And then the seller is just like hopeless, like they're telling you to contact your post office and they can't really do anything, and like they're just useless most of the time. So if possible, use the most expensive shipping available. Don't ever try and save money on shipping, especially if it's supposed to be untracked. Like, always keep it tracked if possible. To be honest, some tracked shippings are useless because they only track the package within the country that has been posted, and then it kind of just disappears as it, I don't know, dropped into the sea or something, but it's always better to have the package tracked than not. Okay, so back to the condition of the clothing. Make sure you clean it. If it has a funny smell, there is a fair chance that the seller have not cleaned the clothing. Really good and like expensive sellers will always make sure the clothing is clean before they sell it. Sometimes because it changes the color of the clothing even. Sometimes because it just smells horrible and it would be kind of a shame to sell it like that. But some people just don't really mind. Like, I have this 1920s dress that smells like a soup and no one cares. There are a couple of methods of cleaning vintage clothing. You have to be extra careful, mainly because of the fabrics that were used back then. I recently cleaned this jacket and it was a very stressful experience, and I was kind of hoping it wouldn't completely evaporate, but it's always a struggle because you never know how the vintage clothing is going to behave. It's kind of hard to tell what fabric it's made of, and how old is the fabric, and how does it react when, you know, pushed into water, and it's all a bit tricky. So I recommend you to read some guides online on how to do it. Then you just have to risk it all. And the reason you need to wash your clothing is not only because of the smell, but also because of moths. You need to beware of moths. Because those little b****s will appear in your clothing sooner or later, and they will be the plague. I didn't have that many moths in my lifetime, which is surprising because I had this whole like rack full of costumes in the corner of my room, but surprisingly they don't really like my room that much. But there was a point this year when I was buying a lot of vintage clothing for my upcoming book and basically I had this like huge pile of vintage clothing in my room, and I think that's where the moths came from, and it was a truly terrifying experience because it was a pile of really expensive stuff just lying around with moths flying out of it. So what I did is I washed all of it, and then I took it to the countryside and I set up a huge string and I just you know, put it on the string, and even after it was dry, I still kind of sun dried it. Just be careful. They don't do that much damage. If there is not that much of them, they will just, you know, rip a hole here and there, but it can but it can get much worse in time, so go back to your lamps. So another thing is the sizing, and it's just that sometimes the description says something else. It's quite often to get a piece of clothing that doesn't really fit you, which is extremely frustrating when it comes to vintage because you can't just return it most of the time. You kind of have to live with it, to be honest. I don't really have an advice for you, like, you just have to hope it fits. I bought, I think I have like 4 1940s jackets at this point. 2 of them fit my waist perfectly, 2 of them are too big, and all of them had the same measurement written down in the description, so it's like you never know. It's funny because sometimes vintage clothing has some specific darts that kind of make room for your boobs, whereas when vintage sellers measure the clothing, they often do it when it's lying flat and they don't really measure, you know, the excess that the darts make. So for example, I bought a dress once and I think it was supposed to be 2 inches too small for me, but I looked at the picture and I was like, wait, but it does have some sort of cups that you're not able to measure properly if it's lying flat. So I kind of risked it all and it turned out it's okay, and it's even actually a little bit too big for me. Unfortunately, some sellers are not particularly good at getting the measurements right, so you really need to trust your intuition. You need to look at the pictures carefully, check out the proportions. I remember one dress where it said that the hips were smaller than the waist, and I was like, what? So I just ignored it and I bought it anyway, and it turned out to be fine. So I have no idea where, you know, at which point they measured the hips, but it was just so wrong. So unfortunately, that's something you have to deal with. Same goes for buying vintage shoes. You actually never know if they're gonna fit or not, but that's just the risk you're gonna have to take if you're willing to go on a vintage clothing buying adventure. That was a long sentence, wow. So I think these are all the things that I didn't know and now I do, and I'm still not smart at all. Like thanks for watching. These are all the things I wanted to say. that is all, and now I'm gonna have to go and what do I need to do today? Oh, it's Halloween! I mean, you're gonna probably watch it in November already, so happy November! I know some of you hate this month, but it's my birthday month, so shut up and enjoy it. Cześć! Przypominam, że moja książka wychodzi już niedługo. Jeśli ją zamówicie przez stronę Znaku, to dostaniecie ją już w poniedziałek bodajże. W każdym razie super wcześnie. Podam wam link w opisie. Druga rzecz jest taka, że właśnie w ten poniedziałek, 19 listopada, widzimy się w Krakowie. Też podam link w opisie, co się będzie działo. Kupujcie. Narka.